it's Victor. Woo! Awesome to have you guys. How are you tonight?
Excellent.
Hey. Oh, amazing. And we've got connection as well. So we've even got generations here with us. So this is absolutely wonderful. If you're not familiar, before we, as more people get on, Michael Seegers and I have been working on the Michael and Laura show. So I was speaking with Michael and I basically said, Michael, we need to let people, I want to understand who Jesus is. I want to understand what the story is. I want to understand, I just want to understand from somebody that has more 40 years worth of training and reading into the teachings of the Ascended Masters, and then to make it also not only just be Michael's perspective, so that other people have an opportunity to contribute as well, because we all have such a wealth of insight. And if we're all just disconnected because our story is a bit different, then it's very difficult for us to come together. And so that's really what tonight is. So I am thrilled to see everyone here tonight. Larry, it's wonderful to have you on. Thank you for tuning in. Jared as well, thank you. And Victor, we have a fabulous gentleman with you as well tonight. Would you like
to... This is my good friend, Chaplain Patrick White. And, we met and we're hanging out and we're just, helping out the community best we can, going out, seeing how everyone's doing on the streets, and going up and saying hello in a time where we're supposed to be doing our part and staying apart. So, we're trying to, be gentle rebels, as you would.
I love it. Thank you, and welcome, Pastor White.
Thank
it's
you.
Wonderful to have you here. And so tonight, what we'll do, it's 7:02, and I want to respect everyone's time. So tonight, we're not doing it quite the same way in terms of Michael didn't come with the lesson, because I just said, Michael, just take that off your shoulders. Let's just have a conversation that comes up and goes with who is here, because the energy of everyone who comes to the call is going to bring up something new. So to start out tonight, I'm going to get us set up. So we're going to stream over live onto Facebook as well, and I'll get that set up while we're kicking off. The meeting is already recording, so I'm just going to do a little quick, hey, Laura J here with amazing people for tonight's call, where we're going to be talking about who is Jesus and why does his story matter. And Michael Seegers has joined me with the starting intro point, and then we're going to see where the call goes from here. But Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm just going to let you take it away.
No pressure.
None.
There is, of course, the historical narrative that has been researched in tremendous depth by scholars around the world for a long time. And some people are aware of the work of Nicholas Notovich in the 1800s, who went to the Middle East and the Far East, maybe not the Far East, but he traveled to India and Ladakh and Nepal. And he was looking for the lost years of Jesus that are not recorded in the Gospels. 17 years of the life of Jesus are not in the Gospels. And Nicholas Notovich somehow got on the trail of that there was evidence that Jesus had traveled into these countries. And in his book, it was very well documented. It was written about again by Elizabeth Clare Prophet about 20, 30 years ago, The Lost Years of Jesus, detailing the work of Nicholas Notovich. And apparently the evidence is quite overwhelming that he did go to India, he did go to Ladakh, Nepal, Tibet, and in some of the monasteries, there are still records of his visiting there. He was known as Issa, spelled I-S-S-A. And that's very interesting information for the people who have only had biblical scripture as a reference point. There is other interesting work that was brought out about 30 years ago in a book called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, and the sequel to it, which was the Messianic Legacy, Michael Bagent, Henry Lee, and a gentleman named Lincoln were the scholars who put together that material. We also have interesting historical reference from Elaine Pagels, who is a professor of religious studies and has written extensively on gospels that are not part of the mainstream Bible. And it brings up interesting questions. What books were included in the Bible? Which books were excluded from the Bible? When the Bible was created? Why it was done? Apparently there was a political agenda with respect to what people were supposed to know or what they were supposed to believe. We discover in Catholic doctrine that asking questions is pretty much not the way they work. And they tell you what you are supposed to believe, regardless of what evidence may exist that contradicts that. And so people from different walks of life have very different understandings of who Jesus was, or who they think he was, or who they understand him to be. And no doubt there's a lot of controversy around that subject. What I bring to the conversation is a radically different perspective. And that is a perspective based on who Jesus actually is. If you were to sit down with him and have a conversation with him, he would tell you the types of things that I will speak about tonight. It's an uncommon type of knowledge. It's not a knowledge necessarily gained from reading books or doing research. It's a type of knowledge that is available to students of the Ascended Masters who engage in the teachings and master some of the techniques to demonstrate what Jesus demonstrated, and even actually visit with Jesus today in what we call the etheric retreats, which is possible for people who learn how to do soul travel, to travel outside the physical body while the body is put at rest and go into the higher realms in the etheric plane where Jesus is available and does teach students. And it's from that kind of a perspective that I would bring elements to the conversation that are generally not known. So who is Jesus? Well, who are we? I think is just as profound a question. We are all immortal souls on a journey of spiritual evolution. And we have a particular divine plan that we are intended to outpicture here in the world of form. And most of us along this pathway have become quite lost in illusion. And so every 2,000 years, there is a dispensation that comes from higher realms by which we are afforded the opportunity of having a mentor. And these 2,000-year ages are named according to what we would recognize as the signs of the zodiac. People talk about we are now entering the age of Aquarius. We have just come out of the age of Pisces. And Jesus was known as the Piscean master, and that's why the symbol of the fish is associated with him. And so for the 2,000-year period, the hope was that Jesus would present to us the example of what we are all intended to become, which is to embody the fullness of the Christ consciousness. Or as it says in chapter 36 of the Quran, which is the heart of the Quran, to become a perfected being. Or as we say in modern terminology, to become an ascended master. To ascend back into the plane of the I Am Presence, which is the source from which we've all descended. And to master all the challenges of time and space, of matter and energy, and become a perfected being. And so it was said of Jesus by his teacher, who was known as Lord Maitreya, that we sent you the best that we had. And if you couldn't recognize the Christ in him, how would you ever recognize it in yourself? So Jesus was the exemplar, the example for all of us to imitate. And it's a very different understanding, especially when we look at the doctrine of vicarious atonement, when people believe that Jesus died for the sins of the world. So now we don't have to atone for our past errors and the karma that we've created because Jesus did that for us. That's actually largely related to Catholic doctrine and based on a lot of errors. There was a particular balancing of planetary karma that was held back by the momentum of light that Jesus was able to embody. But that does not in any way absolve us from the responsibility of doing our part, of cleaning up the errors of our past. And so I think that's a very succinct introduction to the conversation. And I'd like to just really open up to others to participate and bring forth comments and questions.
Now, are the Ascended Masters, because my dad was talking about the Essenes last year around the start of the quarantine, and that's a particular sect that Jesus was a part of. Would that be the Essenes? I don't know if that, like, it sounds like perhaps my dad may have been reading a different thing about the same thing. Would that be, because it was in India that the Essenes were like he trained with or he was with and got lessons from. I'm just wondering if that's perhaps the same thing.
The Essene community was a spiritual community that had strict observances that were designed for purification, body, mind, and spirit. Mm-hmm. And much of that teaching actually originates in India in far more ancient traditions that is very common throughout Buddhism. And so when we go deeper into the teachings of the Ascended Masters, we actually discover that Buddhism is an interplanetary discipline. There are Buddhas on many planets.
That's cool.
And what Jesus taught was really not different from what the Buddha taught 500 years before him. Mm-hmm. And so becoming a perfected being, becoming an Ascended Master actually occurs largely through yogic science.
Yeah, like the universal law, right? Where this everything exists within like this realm, but it's largely influenced by the abstract within all of us. Like meetings of minds, like shape the world, later, kind of thing.
Well, we actually shape the world by our thoughts, our words, and our actions, and more powerfully, I would say, by our words. It's no different for us as the drop in the ocean than what it is for the entire ocean. And in the beginning was the Word, and God spoke the universe into existence with the divine logos, the Word coming into manifestation. And we, as emanations, as individualizations of that divine source, we're all part of that same God energy, and we all bring into manifestation our world through our speaking. Yeah. This is what makes prayer so powerful when prayer is properly understood and properly utilized.
Yeah, because I'm currently studying Indigenous wellness and addictions prevention at Six Nations Polytech in Brantford, Ontario, and we do a lot of medicine wheel teachings where on the medicine wheel you balance your physical self, your mental self, your spiritual self, and your emotional self to have thoughts that reflect actions within the physical realm. Towards a positive, what they refer to as the gonna hekoi, or I have to get that right. They'll totally make fun of me for saying that wrong, but it's referred to as the good mind or the good life, and the perfected being, I would imagine, is what you're talking about. Would strive to achieve this state where they have everything under control in their own life to their own happiness, and they get their daily bread, and that's secure in everything that they do. And anything else on top of that goes back into what's referred to as a community. That's from my understanding.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a very similar foundational teaching.
Yeah, that's yeah, because it's all good from what I'm studying. You know, I'm rather new to this this style of thinking, so I'm really excited about being part of this. So, yeah.
I have a brother that we adopted when he was a year and a half old. He's full-blood Ojibwe. And so I've had the opportunity throughout my life to learn about his tradition and watch him go through his shamanic training. So I'm very familiar with what you're discussing.
Yeah.
All good stuff.
Thank you for being willing to share your perspective and to ask about that. One thing that I wanted to just mention, and it's not necessarily something to go into today, but you had previously mentioned, Michael, in relation to the chart of the divine presence and the cosmic rays, and how each of the religions are actually designed to reflect each of the religions. So when somebody is saying a religion is not complete, it's reflecting that ray, was what you were sharing, which isn't the conversation for today, but I feel like it's relevant to bring it in to say that while this may seem like we're making Jesus more important than anyone else because this is the topic of the conversation tonight, it is simply to say that the Christian faith that idolized Jesus ultimately is one expression of possibility, and each religion had different avatars that embodied the ray that they represented. So I don't know whether I'm saying that correctly, but it just has seemed important to bring into the conversation today.
It's not out of place in this conversation, and you're very close to expressing it properly. The emanations of the rays were not so much reflecting as expressing. And so each of the religions came forth as an expression of one of the ray type energies. And so each religion, by its very nature, could not be complete in what it was able to bring forth. That doesn't mean that the religion was insufficient, because you can develop mastery on any of the 7 rays and perfect yourself accordingly. And each of the religions was originally intended for a particular culture during a particular time period to produce a particular effect. I would go back though and highlight the importance of Jesus from a different perspective. I remember that my martial arts background began when I was 8 years old. And I trained predominantly in judo until I was a teenager, and then I got into karate, and then Bruce Lee came along, and I very much really enjoyed what he had to bring forward. And so by the time I was a teenager, I had left the Catholic Church and became Buddhist and followed the path of Tibetan yoga for many years. And somehow had not really appreciated the proper perspective of the importance of Jesus. That is very much changed in my life now. And what I've come to understand in terms of the spiritual hierarchy is that the role that Jesus plays in our lives is so profoundly important that we absolutely want him to be a part of it. And we want to have a relationship with Jesus. And we want to really pursue our spirituality to really bring forth what Jesus wants us to bring forth. He stands as an intermediary between us and a particular karma that we have created going back millions of years that is so burdensome that if he were not standing there between us, we would be crawling on our hands and knees because the weight of it is that immense. And so Jesus does play a profoundly important role in our spiritual development.
Can you speak deeper into that for anyone that may be new to that idea as to what that means and what it would mean to even be able to ascend to meet the Christos consciousness?
Well, let's talk about simple science, laws of cause and effect. Isaac Newton demonstrated for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so everything that we do, everything that we say, everything that we think comes forth from our source energy as a vibration that goes out into the universe and produces an effect. We are solely responsible for that. So if you express something harmful, something that produces pain, something that produces disharmony in the life of another individual, you alone are responsible for that. Eventually, that energy cycles through space and returns to you. It returns to you multiplied, amplified, and it lies at your feet as a burden that requires correction. And we call that karma. Then there is the karma of community, the karma of the planet. If you drive a car, the car requires gasoline. Well, what does the planet have to suffer to produce gasoline? From the oil wells, the transportation, the atmospheric pollution, just to put the gas in your car. Then your driving of the car. What did it take to assemble the car? The mining of the material to smelt the iron, to make the steel, to build the car. Maybe somebody had to cut down a forest to make the mine, to get the minerals. All of these things have a consequence. And by your participation in the act of owning and driving a car, you share some accountability, some responsibility for the burden that's placed upon the planet for that. But what happens with the food that you eat and the cows that got killed to make the steak on your dinner plate? Every action that you participate in, directly or indirectly, you have some accountability for. And this is karma on a larger scale, and it's not generally considered in most people's thinking. Well, now what happens if your society is involved in weapons of mass destruction, nuclear radiation, atmospheric destruction, ecosystem, all the things that we're guilty of? And this is not new today. This has been going on for hundreds of thousands and millions of years. Man has been on the planet a lot longer than most people imagine. And so in the hierarchy of ascended masters, we discover that there is a group that are known as the Lords of Karma. And they are responsible with dealing with that energy and keeping everything in balance. And by the grace of their higher science and their ability, hold on a second, my computer's just doing something. Sorry about that. By the grace of what the Lords of Karma are able to do, much of that burden that we have created has been held back so that we don't have the entire weight of it. There it goes again, just a second. I wish I could turn that thing off. Then there's a further complication. If you get into a little bit of research on the subject of the fallen angels and look at the book of Enoch, and we get into the extraterrestrial question, and the evidence is overwhelming that there are alien races also here on planet Earth with a not so friendly agenda. And the karmic equation becomes interplanetary and intergalactic. And so we have to be grateful that we have the Lords of Karma to assist us in balancing that energy burden so that the whole brunt of it doesn't land on us in real time, or we'd be crushed. I've gone far afield with that one.
You went the perfect distance for someone to be able to share a perspective or a question. Bergie, welcome. No problem at all. Thrilled to have you here. And it is a open forum where we do welcome you to share your perspectives or stories or considerations, whatever you feel called to do. It very much is the conversation that is really just to help us understand. I'm curious because you've corrected me before when I've mentioned some of the New Age 12-strand DNA activation comments around the Christos consciousness being false hierarchy or false information. So from what I've heard, we're born with Christos consciousness. And if, from my understanding, we live in a world where all of our DNA, everything that came before us is part of us because we're microcosms of the macrocosm. And so we may stand here just as I sit here as me, but I sit here as a reflection of everyone that came before me in order to bring me here, which would then, if my understanding of Jesus's story is that he did have children and does have a bloodline here after the crucifixion and all that we'll be going through the motions of next weekend, if we don't understand the relevance of and the significance of, which is part of the reason that I indirectly said, let's do this call tonight, not even realizing that it's Good Friday next Friday, because I was just in the moment of this needs to happen. And so we scheduled it. But if we don't know the story and we don't know what it means to us, then it's difficult for us to make ultimate use of it. And then when we have all of the other ideas around what's in us and then what's coming online with these turning point times, it's just like, I don't want to be sharing bad information, but if we only share the best that we've got until we have better. So if you have insights into Christos consciousness and the Christ consciousness DNA within our own cells, that would be very helpful for people, I feel.
That's quite a question. You've begun to discuss it in a way that I had not previously considered, the idea about being born with the Christ consciousness. I don't know if that's true or not. I won't say that it's not true. I've never really contemplated that. I think based on the limitations that are imposed by karmic law, incoming soul in a newborn baby, as pure as it is still far removed from the immensity of what the Christ consciousness is. I think it's a potential that far exceeds what a newborn infant is able to hold. We have profound teachings from the masters about what it takes to bring that forth. And the Christ consciousness, I'm quite convinced, is more than most people consider. It's more than being a good person. It's more than being nice to other people and doing good deeds. It is profoundly more radiant in terms of the light that is expressing through the being when there are no more impediments to that light. And so the science of the cosmic clock, which I've introduced you to, shows you in tremendous detail what those impediments are. And when you consider that every thought, word, and deed that you are expressing, waking and sleeping, are loaded with imperfections, and they must be removed permanently in order to express that Christ consciousness. Now, what is in the blood? The blood of the light bearer is very, very different from the blood of somebody who's not of a divine origin. So in that category would be a lot of the extraterrestrials, aliens, fallen angels, those who have forfeited their divine inheritance by choice. And those of us who are on our spiritual journey would include ourselves in what we call the light bearers. We do carry the Christic seed, which is a spiritual DNA in the etheric component of our blood, and even in the physical component of our blood. And when we talk about a lot of the horrors that occur on this planet and the whole human trafficking industry and that whole other conversation, there is a reason that the blood is so desired, and largely because of what the blood contains as the spiritual component, which is the seed of light. It's the Christic seed. So we all have that, not just at the DNA level, but in the cellular material, and then on the etheric level. So everything that we have as physical blood, we also have existing as etheric blood. And there is an actual spiritual DNA embedded in that. And one of the things that's interesting about the process of going through the ascension, Jesus demonstrated a physical ascension. It's not commonly done as it was 1 million years ago or 10 million years ago. It's more difficult now because it requires the balancing of 100% of your karma. When one goes through the physical ascension process, the ascension flame is actually passed through the physical body, and it raises the vibrational frequency to such a level that the blood in the veins turns into liquid golden light. And what is left of the physical body, at best, is a small pile of ash. Often there's nothing left. And then the person is standing in their ascended master light body. So that Christic seed in the blood is the seed of light that actually is involved in the transformative process of the ascension. It's a necessary component.
That ties right into what I was just recently reading about the gene therapy that's currently underway that is altering the Christos DNA within us to create a synthetic component within the original that ultimately is an attack on our natural being and is attached to a very satanic agenda that's been playing out for a very long time. And if we don't, and part of it is to confuse us about where we come from, who we came from, who came before us, and the tools that we have behind us. And with your beeping, I know that it's bothering you, Michael, but whenever the beep comes on yours or anyone else's, I always pay attention to the relevance of it, because generally it just comes in almost as if the universe says ding, and then it's almost as if that serves us and what we're doing too energetically, because it's just the affirmation coming in. For me, is how I interpret when the chime comes. So I'm happy if you're happy, and I'm curious what anyone else is feeling or thinking right now. Victor's laughing at me. That's perfect. Jared, please.
When
Yeah.
the chime comes is the best thing I've ever heard. When the chime comes, that's the best.
Perfect. How do you like that? Jared, if you'll unmute yourself.
Oh yeah. Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to say that, you know, it's my understanding that we are all born with the light of Christ. And the light of Christ is that spark within us that helps us to recognize truth. When we hear truth anywhere, no matter what religion it comes from, or what philosophy or ideology or math calculation we find it in, that truth resonates, and it resonates on that vibration that's the same as the light of Christ that's within us. And so as we hearken to that light of Christ that's within us, it leads us to more truth. And the more truth that we ascribe to and understand, the greater our vibration can be, but also the greater truth that we can have to share with those around us and help them to raise their understanding and increase their light as well. So that you talk about the the Christus spark in your DNA, but I know the light of Christ is within all of us when we are born. That comes just as part of who we are as eternal beings, that we have that spark of deity and understanding that will lead us into all truth. And it's a gift that we have that is like a, you call it a conscience, or you call it a whatever you want to call it, but it's that the light of Christ that leads us to truth. And when we don't listen to that, or when we tune that out, we are subject to being misled. So
Well, there's
that
no
was my
question.
sense.
There's no question we all have a Christ consciousness. There's no question that we all have a Holy Christ self as part of the fullness of being of what we are. I think the point that I was really wanting to make clear was the fact that we don't necessarily express our Christ consciousness 24/7.
Right.
And it is the self-mastery that is required that will make that possible, that the only thing that we're ever expressing is the purity of the Christ consciousness. That's really the goal.
Concurred.
Larry, did you have something you wanted to share?
Nothing in particular. I guess it's interesting. I years ago, I took the Gnostic course that was in London, and it kind of reminded me of some of the deep philosophical questions that was going on at the time, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And so some of this conversation is very much like that, and so it's interesting. Things I haven't thought about for years, actually.
Awesome. I'm thrilled that you came tonight.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Dave Clark, it's great to have you on the call. Thank you for joining us tonight as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just a little bit late getting in, but I'm enjoying the discussion, and we'll keep monitoring. Thank you very much.
You're absolutely welcome. And if you had a question or a contribution about your perspective, please feel free to share that in this safe container that we've created with each other's energies.
Well, in terms of Jesus, it's interesting to see humanity struggle with the obvious. That's what is so interesting to me. I think humans have a tendency in general of doing everything except what's right until the very last moment, and then either on a deathbed or when life becomes really tough, then they'll turn to God. But it's really interesting to see human behavior that oftentimes people have to be taken to the very bottom before they'll realize that life has so much more to offer.
Yes. I don't know whether that's Jesus's DNA or the Christos DNA that makes that the challenge, but that does tie in with the good and the bad wolf that are waging a war within us, that are fighting. And it's just like, for me, and I said to you, I said to Michael early on when we met last year, as I've been on a deep path and a lot of different rabbit holes, more than new age stuff, avoiding religion, because I couldn't believe that one space has everything, when it's like, from my perspective, this whole world is the library that we're pulling from. And so for me, it's just like, I just couldn't get behind the idea of sin. So Don Miguel Ruiz, I like his definition of it being when you speak ill against yourself or someone else. But I share that as context to say that I'm not a religious person, though I have become very faithful, and I've started to wear that more proudly, just simply because I feel like it's needed, and we are in the final hours for humanity, I feel, where we really are at that time where we're under attack, and the attack is subtle because they're using all of the tactics and tools that have been kept secret in the Gnostic societies or secret societies that have made it so that you had to make a vow in order to gain access to the information. And so for me, it's been very important to pull off some of that mysticism and to just make it so that people are celebrated and we understand we could be somebody that future generations write about our legacy and how we came here and we chose to do well with our lives, to transmute the karma that we came here with from previous lifetimes and we're here with now. But I give that as context to then simply say, last year when Michael and I were talking, one of the things that I said is, it's just like, well, like, what if Jesus was actually Satan? Or like, what if it was a way that it was, he was like, he could be good or bad. Like he had to choose to be good from my perspective. And it's just like, I've been working with all of this and Michael's been working with me through it all. Cause it's like, well, like who was this man? So that's part of, in truth, and for those that want to judge me because I just said about that potentiality as a consideration, please judge away, for you only judge yourself, for we are all mirrors to each other. And I don't claim to be perfect. I just claim to be seeking truth, however that looks, and without attachment to what box that truth is found in. So I say that because it's like, from my perspective, anybody that has a tremendous amount of power can either use that for good or can use that for tremendous evil. And it's the individual themselves in that moment that has to choose. It's like, I remember when there was the only time in my life when I've really almost actually knocked somebody out. It was in circumstances where I literally, my dog was dying, and that circumstance, I only bring it up because it was like in that moment, I felt the power of somebody that chose, instead of attacking this person that was being so disrespectful and just not aware because of her drunkenness, which is symbolic for life, and where so many people are so convoluted and confused about everything that it's just, they're not present with what's actually going on, and the insensitivity of the circumstances. And, you know, she's saying we can just go bury my dog before my dog's even dead. And the third time when she said it, I almost pulled back and knocked her out. And then instead, I just pointed my hand home and I said, you take her home, to the other people that were with us. And they took her and my dog died. And it was like, in that moment, though, I knew that I could have done that, or it was like, I chose not to. And I chose the path that I feel like Jesus would have in that moment. And it was like that moment in my life where it was like, that I feel like I made a good choice because I didn't choose violence, but I could have very easily. And I feel like this long story leaves the floor open for someone to respond to it.
Laura, I love what you said about Christ and Satan, because it's just like the two wolves, you know, that you have, which one do you feed, but also life is a mirror and we're reflecting reflections on each other. And so if you think about what's in the mirror, is it the same thing, or is it the exact opposite? It's the exact opposite that's in the mirror. And so when you think about Christ and Jesus are there in the mirror, and they're exactly the opposite. Christ sets free, whereas Satan's goal is to enslave. And so when we talk about that relationship between choosing what we're going to do, Christ's choice set us free. If you chose violence, then you would receive the reward of that choice, which might have been incarceration, which might have been, further hurt and further injury. And because you chose the higher road, because you chose to follow that Christ consciousness in you, you felt that freedom of that choice. And I think that's a great point, that, it's the exact opposite. It's the exact reflection of between the two of them.
I would add to that all questions are valid. It doesn't matter how wrong the question might seem. An honest discussion would permit any question. How else do you learn?
Precisely. So with that question, and that, I know that's not your perspective necessarily, but and in the year while we've kind of been bouncing these ideas back and forth, how would you speak to somebody that maybe was doubting or maybe was questioning or so unsure, or how this they've twisted in their own mind? Or because we can easily do that, because the mind, we like patterns, and so if there's a missing gap, we tend to fill that information in. It's like with telephone, it's like it says one thing and then it gets to the end and it's a completely different message because somebody missed something and then they just made it up as best they could and then passed that on, and then everybody's just doing the best they could, and it's like sometimes by the end the message is completely different than what it started out as.
Well, there's a number of angles you could take with that one. Jared had just said something about choosing, and I've always, for at least 20 years now, had a phrase that I like to fall back on, which is discipline is the foundation of freedom. So where Jared was saying that you were choosing and freedom was the fruit of that choice, it wasn't just the choice of the action, but it was the choice of the disciplining of the energies flowing through you in the moment, how you're going to express that energy. And when we are subject to and often slave to all kinds of passions and all kinds of energies that flow through us, and we have that moment of choice with all of that energy all the time. And when we choose to govern that energy and discipline that energy so that we ensure that it is only expressing loving kindness and only expressing in a way that is a blessing to all of life, we're going to have that freedom that we seek. And so in that context, I would answer your question, or the person bringing that type of a question forward. By their fruits shall ye know them. And ultimately, behavior is the demonstration of character. And when I have people come and they are rabidly, emotionally, emphatically stuck on a particular point, what they're demonstrating to anybody who is a witness to that behavior is that they are ungoverned and not disciplining their energy in the way it's expressing. And that is clear evidence of a lack of self-mastery. And if Jesus was the master as the prototype, then the behavior that evidences the lack of that mastery would be the indication of whether or not that individual was expressing the light or the darkness. And that would be a very reliable yardstick in all cases.
Yeah, by your results, we will know the choices you've made to create the consequences of the choice. Going back to Victor's question earlier about the Essenes and the missing years in the Bible when Jesus is out of the story, in those years, from my understanding, he went to Tibet and was learning from the ascended masters.
That is correct. The personal guru of
The
Jesus.
missing years in the Bible when Jesus is out of the story. Oh. Feel free to unmute yourself. It's just we hear the replay coming back at us there, Tariq. But
the personal guru. Yeah, there's a time delay on that.
Yes. And
the personal guru of Jesus is Lord Maitreya. Lord Maitreya is known in Buddhist scriptures and in older Hindu scriptures. When you study Vedic literature and read in what is known as Srimad Bhagavatam, which is about an 18-volume set, about 40,000 words, history of what was happening in the world at that time, going back tens and hundreds of thousands of years, you encounter the name Lord Maitreya all over the text. And he is known as the Buddha who will come again. Lord Maitreya holds the office in the spiritual hierarchy, which is known as the office of the cosmic Christ. And he is still today the personal mentor of Jesus. And it was in Tibet, and I think even possibly more so in Ladakh, where Jesus spent time with Maitreya and was trained in the advanced techniques and the advanced initiations, whereby he could develop and express total mastery over the physical elements. And that's how he was able to perform the miracles, change the water into wine, walk on water, heal the sick, raise the dead. All masters have that ability. It is, as I said, by yogic science that attainment is possible. And that was largely the type of things that Jesus was studying with Lord Maitreya. All masters have that ability.
Shoot, sorry. Science. I'm just going for the comments. I'm trying to, I got the same thing as what Tariq had. You can't pause it. Oh, it won't let you pause it? Oh, okay, well that doesn't work. Sorry, guys. Oh, darn it. I'm just going for the comments. Darn it. I'm trying to, all right. Was Jesus a Christian? Was the question that I can see on there, and trying to get that off. That was, sorry about that. Was Jesus a Christian? Was the question that somebody posted in the comments there, which.
That's an interesting question, because the word Christos is a Greek word that means the anointed one. And the origin of that word is actually in the Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit is Krishna. And so if you've ever seen the people who are part of that movement that they call the Hare Krishnas, and you'll discover that they chant the name Krishna as part of their sacred work, again, it is the use of the eternal logos. It is the science of the spoken word. And when chanting the names of God and recognizing Krishna as that divine being, as that emanation of the divine source, they are elevating their consciousness to that level of the Christ. And where it gets even more interesting is that when you look at the Hindu understanding of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, which transposes into the Western version of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you see that Vishnu is the second person of the Trinity, as the Son aspect of the divinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It is described in the literature that Vishnu embodied through the descent of an avatar 8 times. And one of those was Lord Rama, whose life is written in the Vedic literature called Ramayana. But one of the later embodiments was as Krishna. So Vishnu, the second person of the Trinity, the aspect of the Son, expressing as Krishna, is identical in theme, in flavor, in understanding to the whole idea of Jesus as the Son of God, expressing the Son aspect of the divinity. So was Jesus a Christian? Had to be, by definition.
Excellent. Anyone else have any questions that you might want to ask or put forth? What? glad you had to handle that one. It's awfully contentious to speak about religion publicly, especially when you're doing it and people can comment without having to show their face, because the anonymity sometimes makes it so there's a lack of respect included, which isn't to say these questions were, because that was a respectful question. It's just, I feel like it's important to say that around a topic as controversial as religion, I feel like it is a really amazing reflection of all of us who have tuned in today to be able to have this conversation respectfully and to be able to not even agree about everything necessarily, but to be able to feel the truth for ourselves, to be able to really understand what it takes to be able to cast the shadows out of our own inner kingdom so that we can become more Christ-like, and that we can. Is it possible for people to really not harvest the Christos consciousness, but to be able to really enlighten ourselves further, faster, without doing spiritual bypassing through external substances or opportunities that, you know, you jump through some steps and then you ultimately take them backwards because you needed to get them somehow, and the universe isn't always kind if you do it irresponsibly?
Fantastic question. The masters have a phrase, they talk about storming the gates of heaven by force. And we are told in no uncertain terms that heaven is not attained through mechanical means. And so it is by God's grace that we achieve that final at-one-ment, that reunion, that coming home. And it is through the agency of the Holy Spirit and is through spiritual practice that we most effectively accomplish that. And so when we look to the outer world, in the world of form, and we look at what is popular in the day, whether it is the use of psychedelic drugs or hypnosis, or they have now the brain entrainment technology where you can listen to hemisync sound waves and different types of music. This is generating states of consciousness through external means, which means that you're not doing it yourself. And so as soon as you give that up, you forfeit the self-mastery, which eventually you have to come back and deal with. We are here to become ascended masters. The purpose of life is to become an ascended master. Jesus said, all these things and even greater things will ye do because I go unto the Father. And I remember being a little boy in a Catholic school saying to the priest, where is the how-to book, please? If Jesus walked on water and his promise was that I could be able to walk on water, where's the manual? I want to know how to do that. And that was,
Yeah, come in.
Pardon me?
Oh, sorry.
And so that was not the kind of question that was really welcomed in the tradition that I grew up in. But the statements are clear. If you trust the scripture, all these things and even greater things will ye do. Well, let me see. He walked on water. He raised the dead. He ascended into heaven. He said, we will do this too. That means we are here to become as he became. We are here to become an ascended, perfected being.
And with that, so for anybody that isn't familiar with the chart of the I Am Presence or the chart of the Divine Presence, essentially at there's a white pillar that is the tube of light that surrounds us at the human level on the earth, with the violet flame around us, which was the gift Saint Germain gave to transmute some of the karma that we've accrued from the past and also this lifetime. And then above by a silver cord, there is the Christos consciousness above the human aspect of us. And then above the Christos consciousness, there is the I am that I am, which is like the picture of God that each of us bring with us to remind ourselves that we're never alone. And so with the Christos consciousness being literally in between us and the I am that I am, divine presence above that, the bringing down of the corona that we're being taught to fear, because that's very strategic for us to fear our own empowerment. The corona is the gaseous aura around a sun, of which we are one too. And essentially it's the halo effect that is when the Christos consciousness and the humanly self merge. Correct?
There's no question that there is a merge that is desirable, that is possible. And when the Holy Christ self does descend over the form, that is the demonstration of the mastery and the attainment. And then you walk the earth as a living Christ.
So the Christos consciousness descends instead of us ascending to it, or is it
in response to our raising our vibration sufficiently and being purified to the point where that is possible? Eventually, the I am presence will descend and overshadow the form.
And in the overshadowing, it's like an energetic overlay on top of us that
is purely divine. So when ascended masters walk the earth, and they do, and they are completely unrecognized, because you wouldn't know them if they chose not to make themselves known. They would be standing right in front of you. They could shake hands with you. They're physical to touch. They are in the fullness of their I am presence.
because there's no middleman now, since they've merged with
Exactly. They have merged with the I am presence. So when Guy Ballard met Saint Germain in Mount Shasta, California in 1930, Saint Germain was there physically with him, expressing the fullness of his I am presence.
Fascinating. I am aware that it has been an hour on a Friday night, and it's been insightful conversation, and certainly I am happy to be here for more. I would love for anyone else to ask any questions or make any comments, so that way, if this is something even that we wanted to come back to as well, we don't have to necessarily cover everything in one class. I think this is a great starting point. And so certainly, I guess in the lead up to Easter, it could be a great opportunity for us to do more around after what's come from today. So if there aren't any more questions or contributions, certainly we can.
I would have one.
Beautiful, Larry. Yes, please.
Just out of curiosity, maybe Michael or yourself can answer this question. But I was wondering, in today's environment with, we'll say, restrictions and non-normalcy, what is it that we should be more concerned about? What should be on our minds? What is important now? I guess would be my question.
I think people often are looking for answers in the wrong places. So your question is really good. It is out of hopelessness and despair that the strongest impulse for spirituality arises. And we really need to return to God and seek the solutions in the spiritual dimension. And for many people, that might mean learning how to pray. Many people don't do that. And the benefits of that type of activity, being engaged in prayer or being engaged in spiritual contemplation or meditation, are not just spiritual benefits. They're physical benefits. They're good for your state of mind. They're good for your physical health down to the cellular level. And for people that want to have a more powerful impact on the world that they live in, it may be difficult to appreciate initially, but the truth is, by the power of your spiritual effort, you can make a profound impact on the world around you just by diligent application. And that's the type of thing that we teach at our group, Shambhala Temple of Light. It's the type of thing that Laura has been introduced to in the past year, and one of the reasons why she's so excited to be sharing with people the things that I bring forth. I've got more than 40 years of training and experience with this type of thing, and I want to be able to share with people the powerful spiritual technologies and spiritual solutions that are available that they've never encountered before. So, excellent question.
You made me think, it really, in this whole environment, you really see that there's a lot of followers, but very few leaders. Before, in the before times, we kind of did our own thing, and we were basically, we'll call it that, the normal. And now we're in an environment where people are looking to somebody else to saying, okay, this is a person that's going to lead me out of whatever the problem happens to be. And I'm not necessarily one of these people. I'll try to make my people around me comfortable, but I also realize, wow, these people are just following blindly into whatever they're doing. They're not controlling necessarily their own life. They're trying to find some meaning in from somebody else. And I find that actually kind of fascinating. As we'll call it, as the world goes crazy, I'm just watching it go around me.
The world's gone insane. Crazy is different.
Okay, sure.
Insanity is doing the same thing over again, expecting different results. So it's a bit of madness, it's a bit of crazy, it's a bit of insanity for sure. But when everybody's looking to others to lead them, it's look at our socializing system. We've been completely trained away from our natural nature. We're put into socializing systems in schools to raise our hand, to ask to do basic bodily functions that as a man or a woman, we know we got to go to the bathroom. It needs to happen. But nowadays, you have to ask if you have permission to do such a thing. If you have anything going on in your body, you're trained to go to an authority, which is seen to be the doctor, which that institution was created in the 1900s by the Rockefeller Foundation that has a really nasty Rockefeller Report 2010 with the agenda of everything going on. So it's just like we've been socialized to become slaves as part of a system that keeps us away from our power. So for your last question, showing up at a summit like this to have these conscious conversations, that's a big piece of how you support yourself through this too. And when you look to the leaders, the best way to see who a leader is to actually, when you come into a group context, you look to who people look to when you ask the question, because people automatically will turn to their leader. If you're in a gang situation, you don't talk to the gatekeepers specifically, who are the ones just not wanting you in their community that they've already bought belonging to based on what they had to do to get there. So when you go into a group circumstance, it's natural tribal dynamics for when a question is asked by an outsider, that the ones that are being asked the question look to the leader to see whether they can answer the question.
And I think what you're witnessing, Larry, is evidence of a behavior that is just embedded within the consciousness everywhere you go. And that behavior is one of mental laziness and not wanting to think, preferring to just follow and not engage in some mental activity. Thinking is burdensome. Most people would choose physical labor over thought. And insightful inquiry takes some effort.
I was thinking too of the after time. You know, I don't know how long this would be, where people who were looking to these leaders finally realize that they're not leading and they have no answers. And then the masses would say, what do I do now? And I kind of envision myself saying, okay, let's talking to these people and saying, okay, you need to follow your own self. And I think it's until something like this where they actually see the disillusion that you can actually go in and kind of empower these people. I don't want to say anything else, but just say empower these people in a way that they never really thought of. Right now, they're sort of having a blind guidedness, I'm going to say, into whoever is on TV and whoever happens to say and who's got the nicest suit. And you know, I like to say that people like to listen to, if your first name starts with doctor and you have a lab coat on, then whatever you say must be true. And I think that a disillusionment will happen at some point. And then it'll be people like us saying, no, the power was always within. And let me show you how to find it.
And we have a responsibility to do that. And what we will discover is that there is a density of consciousness that will be the determinant as to who is the audience and who is the way shower. And so every one of us at our particular level of consciousness will have an ability to impact those who are beginning to wake up and beginning to ask questions and wanting to search for truth. And eventually, we would hope that they come through people like yourselves to what we have to offer, because all these solutions are available in the teachings of the Ascended Masters. The Masters have the answers for absolutely everything. And I've exhausted my question list through 40 years of being engaged with this material and discovered it's absolutely true that there is nothing that the Masters cannot deal with and cannot answer and cannot handle. And it's just a matter of learning what is available. It's always been available. And in the past, it was done through the tradition of mystery schools where very few people had access. But today the Masters are much more accessible and the doors are open to anybody that wants to come and walk through them.
And the Shambhala Temple of Light is where you practice and what you founded actually in 2008 it was, Michael?
Might have been 07. This is our 14th anniversary this year.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so Shambhala itself, just for anybody that's unfamiliar with what that is in itself, can you explain what Shambhala means just for anybody that might be interested in learning more?
Well, there's an ancient tradition that you'll find in the East, both in the Hindu and the Buddhist literature, where it may have been described as the city of light or the city of the gods. It actually did exist a few million years ago on an island in the Gobi Sea. And it is where the Masters, for the first time in a long, long time, made themselves available to humanity. And that was literally in the millions of years ago. And the traditions of Shambhala can be found in a number of religions. In the Zoroastrian tradition, in their sacred book called the Zend-Avesta, you'll discover that Ahura Mazda was the Ascended Master who we know as son of Kumara, who was bringing forth the religion of the sacred fire, and his student Zarathustra was the founder of that Zoroastrian tradition. In the book of Daniel in the Old Testament of the Bible, we discover the same person described as the Ancient of Days. And in Buddhist scripture, he was known as the Buddha Dipamkara. And it's from Shambhala millions of years ago that this tradition has extended up into the present day, whereby the masters have made themselves available to the rest of humanity.
That is amazing information. I have had somebody ask on Facebook whether Jesus walked on water and raised the dead. Was a question that somebody had asked over there, which is different from the Shambhala. So I know we're kind of looping around, but that question was asked over on Facebook. So I do want to respect that.
Well, of course he did. And when we take Saint Germain's teaching on alchemy, and Saint Germain was the master alchemist, and he was very well known in the courts of France, King Louis XIV, King Louis XV. He was a very good friend of King Louis XV. He demonstrated alchemical precipitation. He did alchemical transmutation, the very similar things that Jesus demonstrated through the science of alchemy, which we talk about yogic science. Well, yoga is all about alchemy when you get down to it. And so in Saint Germain's book, Studies in Alchemy, it begins in chapter 1, in the very first line, talking about 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked on water, how he was demonstrating scientific laws dealing with light and gravitation and forces that are known and recognized and understood by the masters that we have not yet understood in our science today. And so absolutely, Jesus did walk on water, and he did heal the sick, and he did raise the dead. We are expected to do the same. Remember, even all these things and greater things will ye do. And it's through the science, the sacred science of alchemy, which is the alchemistry of life, which is taught so magnificently in Saint Germain's material, we all have the ability to develop this type of attainment.
So we can all be alchemists like what Jesus was and Saint Germain. And so all these things you two can do and more, he said. And that, I feel, is the way that we can end tonight. I don't have any more questions over on Facebook. So thank you for asking the questions. Birgie, yes, please.
I was just curious. It's partly question, partly comment. I've had a number of so-called near-death experiences. One very powerful one, and I was hit by a car, found with no vital signs on the street. But I remember my experience, and it was the most profound experience of myself. But it has nothing to do with the body, the personality, all these things that we identify and attach ourselves with here in the physical material plane. And after that, I was able to see through people's facial expressions and their words, and I could feel their pain and their suffering and what they were hiding from people. And I also got a lot of visions through dreams. Sometimes it came in the middle of the day and randomly. I didn't have control over when this information and messages come. So I'm wondering what, I'm not that familiar with the Shambhala of Light. I've done numerous silent meditation retreats and lots of inward introspective work, so-called esoteric spiritual work. I've been practicing yoga most of my life on and off. I was just curious what anybody else may think or know of so-called near-death experiences. To me, it doesn't feel like a near-death. It feels like I crossed through another realm. And I remember the experience when I was coming back, and it was like coming through levels and layers. And I remember my first thought here was, oh, I'm back here where it's all about polar opposites. Where's that feeling of oneness, the profound sense of myself where I was a part of everything and everything was a part of me? There's no polarity there. There's no black, white, good, bad, male, female, up, down, smart, dumb, any of that.
Well, what you're describing is not unfamiliar to me. I had my own experience in 1974, and I was exiting the body. I was lying, freezing to death in a snowbank, and actually given the opportunity to choose. And my curiosity was such that I really wanted to go into the next world. And my conscience was saying my mother would be destroyed. And so I chose to come back, and I came back with the full awareness of the experience of having seen the other side and gone into that world. And so I totally relate to what you're describing. And you have had an impact on a very profound level that has opened up some of the circuits in your higher consciousness. And so now you have perhaps it's a burden at times to have this experience where more of your consciousness is open and receptive to energies that are not normally flowing. Perfectly normal.
I forgot to share that I had a similar piece. I saw my maternal grandmother, who I'd only met once in my life when I was 6 years old on the mountains in Bosnia. And she said to me, "It's not your time yet, my child." And then it was like my focus and attention was turned to the side to see. I didn't have the language for it at the time, but subsequently, like a holographic image of my mother. And similarly to what you just shared, that my mother would be destroyed if I had continued and not come back.
It's interesting how it's made possible for us to have those type of experiences. In those moments, our consciousness is not as encumbered by the restrictions that are part of the physical plane experience. And so it becomes very easy for someone like your grandmother to come and spend those moments with you and share with you that precious experience.
Yeah, I had met her when I was 6, and this had happened when I was 26, so 20 years later.
Yeah, life is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Pastor White, did you have a question? Or was that a hand up? I just saw your hand move. Sorry. When I can see you, I noticed. So I would have been glad if you had wanted to share anything. Does anybody want to say anything final tonight? Thank you for sharing that, Bergie, as well. That was beautiful. It's wonderful to hear the stories of those who are present. Yes, please.
I just want to make one comment which I liked, which is the oneness and the tribe. I heard the word tribe as well, and the sense of community, I think, which is, I think the world needs so much of right now. We've got all the comforts and the conveniences, but I think over time lost that sense of belonging and community. And I hope like all this work leads to, a sense of community and belonging for all the people who come together on this. So it was nice to hear those words like oneness and all of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Tariq.
Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I will say how interesting this was. I've been very quiet tonight for several reasons, but I would like to come back again because there are many things that I've asked my friend not to say, but I'm actually the bishop for the Chaplain's Office of Canada. I teach theology worldwide, and it's very interesting. I also have many strange things and happenings, but in Jesus, part of what you were talking about, whether you realize it or you may have, I'm Jewish, and we have what we call the mystics of the Kabbalah. Have you heard of the Kabbalah? It's very, very similar to what you were saying. So I always tell people, when you're listening and learning, you never criticize or judge. You listen to learn. In life, we always get something out of every class and conversation. We may not adhere to everything, but what you get is like a puzzle. And eventually, at the time when you're ready to leave, that's the last piece that goes in the puzzle. But thank you for having me and allowing me to listen with you tonight.
Thank you for joining us. Michael?
That is absolutely fantastic. I studied Kabbalah beginning in probably 1976. I have a friend in Brooklyn who teaches Talmud in the synagogue. And when he met me and discovered where my consciousness was at, he informed his rabbi in Jerusalem. And he said, this is the man we were looking for. And the rabbi, this back in 1993, rabbi paid my expenses to fly me to Brooklyn so he could sit down and talk to me.
Mm.
And it was described to me that he was the foremost individual in the world on the subject of Kabbalah. And so we had a very wonderful conversation. And it's a subject that is, I'm not foreign to that at all. So it's really a joy to discover that we have somebody here this evening that has experience with that, and certainly opens the door to new conversations.
Thank you.
Absolutely, it opens doors to new conversations, and we can have another gathering like this. Absolutely. I think now is the time when it's needed more than ever. Margie?
I just wanted to add one of the major message I came back with from the big so-called near-death experience was that we're all here to love and learn and help one another to heal and to elevate. That's it. Everything else is just made up.
Loving kindness. So perhaps we should at least make available to anybody who is interested this evening access to what we offer at Shambhala Temple Light. Laura, you're familiar with the document I created just recently with the links for our information?
I believe so, but if you just make sure that I'm sending the right one, I'm happy to make sure.
I'll send it to you again tonight. It's the introduction to the teaching, so it's got the link to the piece I wrote on Quora about who are the Ascended Masters, and then the links to our beginner class videos where you can discover who you are as a divine being. And the response to those videos has been fantastic. The people who are ready for that information went through it very quickly and called me within 24 hours and said, what's next? And so if people here are ready for that information, we want to make sure that you get it. And we'll bring you along at whatever speed is good for you.
So if anyone that is watching the replay is interested in gaining access to that information, I'm happy to make sure that you get that information as well. If you just send me a private message over on Facebook or on YouTube, if you just make a comment below this video to say that you would like to get the video and the email that we can get it to, then we'll be happy to make sure that you're able to gain access to the information that you've only gained access to tonight because you're ready for it. Because when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and when the teacher is ready, the student appears.
That document is uploaded to Dropbox. I'm wondering if we can put the bit.ly link on screen for that.
Sure. I have shared screen capacity. I've given anybody the ability to share a screen.
I just have to figure out. I have that. Let me text it to you and then you can put it up, okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. And so we'll get that information up so that you guys have access to more tools and resources. The Michael and Laura show that Michael and I started working on creating episodes introducing the teachings of the Ascended Masters, the Chart of the Divine Presence. We've recently done 2 episodes on Mother Mary and the Rosary as spiritual tools as well. That was fascinating. We've got tonight's conversation, which we can certainly gather to have more of the opportunity to gather. And so there is so much information out there. We all know that, but it's about finding what resonates best for us so that we can then work with what's going to really take us to the next level that we're looking for. So I will put it into the replay. So it is all good. So when we get this up onto YouTube, then it'll be up there, and I'll make sure that everybody in the screen here tonight personally gets the link so that you can gain access to that instantly. I will put it in the comments on the original Facebook video as well, where this has been live streamed. So you'll be able to gain access to it there. And we are at 8:30. It has been an hour and a half on a Friday night talking about Jesus and so much more. So thank you for being people that are willing to invest your time, energy, effort, and attention on being something like this on a Friday night. I know it is during, times when you're not really supposed to be going out on a Friday night, so it's a little bit different, but even still, I think that the people that are in the frame tonight are people that would probably have been here anyway, because honor and respect to each of you who showed up tonight. Truly, thank you. And appreciations for everything that it took for all of us to show up in the room. And so on this note, we will end tonight, and then we will come together again soon. I will post that information out. And if anybody is interested in getting emails from myself, you can go to ljeh.ca, and then I send out emails with the links to the calls that I do. On Thursday nights, I do also read I read a book for an hour on Thursday nights, and I have been reading Saint Germain on alchemy. So if you are interested in hearing about alchemy but don't want to have to read it yourself, I'm doing that to help hold myself accountable for moving through the works. And then once it's all finished, then we'll be able to do some deeper dives into that. So Michael and I will get that going next year. But in the meantime, we've got what we're doing, and these are amazing opportunities. So I'm just really grateful for everyone and wish you all a wonderful evening.
Thanks.
Wonderful to have you all. Thank you.
It's been a party.
Thank you so much. It's been very good.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
See you later.